Happy Purim! Purim is the most festive holiday in the Jewish calendar, and we celebrate it in so many different ways. I want to begin by blessing and giving everyone a kind message of finding joy and celebration both on this day of Purim and throughout the entire year. We have many reasons often in life where things are not going that well, and yet joy is a tool and a resource that when used properly can actually help us get through difficult times. Many people say, if things weren't so difficult, I'd be joyous. The truth is, if you were joyous, things wouldn't be so difficult. So, happy Purim to everyone, and may this be a very joyous year for everyone, everywhere. I don't want to neglect to mention that as we're celebrating Purim, we're literally coming from the aftermath of a horrible attack against innocent people, yet again in Brussels. And our hearts and souls and prayers go out to all the families of those that were lost and killed tragically by these brutal attacks. Reminding us yet again of the volatile and threatening situation we are in, both in Europe and the entire world, and especially our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land that have been going through this every day with unwarranted and unprovoked attacks, stabbings, and so on that are taking place in the streets of Israel. So, as I've discussed many times, events that happen in the world often, unfortunately, begin first with the Jews. If you think it's just going to be the Jews, it's never been that way. Hitler was not that way. Stalin was not that way. As they say, the Jewish people are often compared to the miner's canary when there's trouble brewing. The Jews are the most sensitive and will often be attacked first. So this is truly a war not against Jews, it's a war on innocent people everywhere. And it's time to wake up to the fact, as well as remember that even when we celebrate Purim, that's exactly what Purim is all about. Several thousand years ago, there was also a great terrorist by the name of Haman in the Persian Empire, in the Middle East, a Middle Eastern terrorist who fell in the favor of Ahasuerus, the king of the time, the Persian king, who controlled the entire population of the world, the 127 countries from Haidu to Kush. Haidu is India, Kush is Ethiopia. And he controlled that, and there's the Megillah, the Purim Megillah, that which we read tonight and read again tomorrow on Purim, talks about the terrible events that almost led to total genocide, annihilation of the Jewish people, and it turned around and became a day of great celebration where the enemies were destroyed and the Jews were redeemed. So we also take solace from Purim, is that we've been here before. And though there are terrorists out there, more than just few, there's a plot and conspiracy, no different than it was back then, also originating Middle Eastern terrorism from Muslim fundamentalists. Haman was not a Muslim fundamentalist because there was no Islam yet. However, today it takes on a different shape and form, the Haman is of our time, that we too should not lose hope and gain strength from Purim, praying, uniting with each other, sharing, celebrating together in a festive meal on Purim, hearing the story of the Megillah, Mashleach Mana sending gifts to one another, Matanas Levyanim, financial charity to the poor. These are the ways we counter the decrees and the dark clouds hanging over us in our time, by becoming stronger in our commitment to good, because good has the power to vanquish evil. Light has the power to dispel darkness. And just as then we ended up celebrating here too, we will ultimately vanquish the Hamans and the Middle Eastern Hamans of our time in vanquishing them completely and celebrating as it was then, that there'll be that for the Jews, and now in the case for all people, there'll be Eira, which is light, simcha, joy, sasan, celebration, jubilation, and Yikar, honor and dignity. So too, Kain Tiyalonu, as we say every Saturday night, in our times today. Just as it was then, that is so too today. So that's where we are, and I wanted to open up with that statement about Purim then and Purim today, and the tremendous lessons that we can learn. At the same time, just as it was during the Megillah, we actually had to rise up with arms and go to war with the enemies. So here too, it's not just about praying and fasting, as we did today, in preparation for Purim and for the celebration and for the salvation that took place then, but we also do what we have to do in natural means to make sure to, firstly, to prevent any such further attacks and to apprehend all these criminals and punish them accordingly, and ultimately eradicate the spewing hatred that's coming out of the different mosques in wherever it is in the world, and especially in the Middle East, against Jews, against innocent people, against the West, and once and for all declare that we are at war with anyone that is ready to kill people in the name of Allah or God, is absolutely not just unacceptable, but if you represent God, you have to represent also the goodness and compassion of God. And Abraham, our grandfather, including of our Muslim cousins, dictated and showed the way by praying for the infidels of Sodom, as the biblical story tells us. But the bottom line is that we have to do everything that it takes, both naturally and spiritually, in this war that we have to fight, and ultimately we will not just ultimately, hopefully as soon as possible, we do what's right, we'll have the same type of salvation as it was then, and a complete redemption and complete destruction of all the forces that want to touch or hurt anybody that's innocent in this world, men, women, or children. Let's go now to the topic of Purim itself, which is also connected to this. What exactly is joy, especially joy in face of darkness? One could say, you know what, we have to be more modest and humble when there's deaths. No, joy is not about ignoring death and pain, as we see from the story of Purim. Joy is a way of countering it. So if pain and darkness it descends, the way to counter it is with joy. Now obviously, when someone is shitting shiva, God forbid, or someone has a loss, you don't go to celebrate and dance with them. But there's still an element of retaining the inner joy that a human being has, so we can fight any type of battle that we need. To become demoralized and broken is not an option. And that itself, you find in Purim fascinating lessons in this joy. And we're going to speak about the topic being, do you know how to get beyond yourself? Do you know how to get beyond yourself? And the theme, the title will be self-understood as we go along here in this discussion, in this Purim celebration discussion. Now we know self-interest, the word self-interest is known to have a very bad reputation. And yet, without that voice of self-interest within us, we would be incapable of protecting ourselves from harm. Because self-interest protects a person. Even denial has its value when it's with moderation, because it also protects us from shock and trauma that may be too overwhelming for us. But at the same time, though we need this force of self-interest, how do we protect ourselves from the going overboard where we, due to our subjectivity, lose sight of what is right? We all have our biases and our prejudices, which blind us from being clear. You know the expression, are you your own worst enemy? How is that possible? How could someone become their own worst enemy? Precisely because of our blind spots, because we get trapped in our own egos, our own self-interest, we can end up doing things that we're not even aware of that's hurting us, which is far worse than an enemy without. Because someone that's an enemy without, you dictate here's an enemy, you define there's an enemy, and you act accordingly, you protect yourself accordingly. But what do you do when the enemy is within? When you are your own worst enemy? How do you get out of that trap? And Purim, my friends, is the answer. That's what we will be discussing. How Purim helps you get beyond yourself in order to reach new horizons and see things you would not see usually due to your own myopic and narrow view. So again, there is value to have that self-interest, but the downside is it also can trap you into your own comfort zone and your own box. Purim helps us get beyond ourselves. Now, sadly, the reality is that very often we get beyond ourselves when we're suffering. When things are going well and we're comfortable, we say to ourselves, why do I have to do anything? We become complacent, apathetic. I never can resist the joke I always say. The guy asked his friend, what's worse, ignorance or apathy? And he said, I don't know, and I don't care. Apathy. That apathy creates this comfort zone where we remain at a certain, sometimes even mediocre state, the status quo. What shakes us up is when something happens that's negative. Suddenly your comfort zone, your security blanket is pulled out from beneath you. Your comfort zone and your teddy bears or other things you turn to, your crushes, are no longer there, or they're in a weakened state. So that shakes us up. And no one should know of this. But we see in life that often those cracks is what begins to allow the light to get in. Because when you don't have the crack, your mind can be fine, nothing to do. On a positive sense, this is exactly, for example, in business, what competition does. We have an expression, kinas sofrim tar b'chochma. The envy of scholars, of sofrim, of students, of sofrim is also scribes, tar b'chochma, adds in wisdom. Why? Because that healthy competition, that healthy envy motivates. And you'll see excellence is always driven by some resistance. And the resistance is often from the competition, from someone who's doing similar to you, and you want to outdo them. So there's a positive side to this type of envy. We're not talking about the negative, we're talking about the positive, the motivational element. You see it in school, in education. It can be used in many different areas. So there is an element of shaking us up, not necessarily through pain, but through resistance, through challenge. That's the second way that we wake up. And the third way is the joy of Purim. So yes, it's true, it came after step one, which was pain and suffering, in the sense of a real decree, a real sword hanging over the heads of the Jews, and even ways, think of it even worse than the Nazis. As terrible as they did, but they didn't have control of every Jew all over the world. Achashverosh, all the Jews lived under his rule. So that would have meant a total genocide in one day. Or how much time it would have taken, designated for the day of Purim. And the turnaround of that led to a tremendous amount of joy, a joy that's beyond measure. Because when you come out of a very dark place, suddenly the light becomes much more appreciated. But there's more to it. There's more to it. In psychological terms, from a Jewish perspective, you'll always see we don't just satisfy ourselves after we deal with a challenge or a painful situation and say, okay, it's over, let's move on. No. Now we have to use that as a catalyst and a springboard that allows us to reach places far beyond our capacity. So then the pain and the momentary and the temporary pain and setbacks and challenges suddenly become assets, converted and transformed. It gets transformed into forces that create a power to get beyond ourselves. And that we do now in a positive way, which answers a very fundamental question. Why do we fast Tainus Esther? We celebrate Purim because of the celebration of the miracle. But the fasting was a result of negative events, of the decree. There is no decree today. We're only honoring the salvation, the redemption. So why are we reminded by fasting? Fasting is considered because the fasting itself then was due to a decree. Today is due to the fact that it is being converted and used as a springboard for the joy. That was what we ultimately resulted in. And we don't forget the forces that led us here. On personal psychological terms, even those that go through abuse or other forms of darkness in their lives, the ultimate redemption is not just that you free yourself of the darkness. That's great. But you also thank it in a way because it led you to find deeper strings that you would not have discovered on your own. So that's why we also remember the fasting. In addition, of course, to the fact that there may be other things to fast for, like what's happening now in the world or in our own personal lives. But primarily, it's even if everything is going well, we don't forget what brought us here. Just like in Pesach, Passover, you could ask the same question. Why do we remember the bitter herbs? It's one thing eating matzah, fine. Drinking wine. The other customs and traditions and mitzvahs that we do, commemorating the geula, the redemption. But why do we have to be reminded of something of pain that doesn't exist now? So it's honoring and remembering it's not because the pain was part of the growth. And there's never something you just reject and say goodbye to. You say goodbye to the negative aspects of it, and that you discard. But you thank those moments. You thank those moments that become redeemed in the process because they helped you build deeper strengths. So you're not thanking, you're not embracing the infection, but you're embracing the strengths that it built within you to fight it and to overcome it and to be a greater person today. So Purim has this element of joy that is unbounded for this particular reason, because you're dealing with a joy that's not just the regular happiness of life, existential contentment of life, but it's a joy that goes to a deeper place. And that's why you find in the Talmud the obligation on Purim, chayv inish l'psuma, that a person should get intoxicated to the point adalayada that they can't distinguish between the blessing of Mordechai and the curse of Haman. What kind of statement is that? What kind of intoxication? Intoxication, losing control. But the deeper meaning behind it is, nichnis yain yotza seid, when wine comes in, the secret comes out. And the literal means that a person that they say a drunk is what's auf in lung is auf in sung, what's on his lung is on his tongue. But here it obviously means on a different level. Yayin is the gematria, the numerical equivalent of Yud, Yud, and Nun is 70. And Sod is also 70. Secret. So just like the wine that's hidden in the grape, and when you press the grapes, you produce wine, the same thing, the wine, the secrets, the deeper cosmic secrets of existence, and the deeper, more intimate powers that we have within us, nichnas yayin, they emerge through the pressure of life. In this case, there could be the pressure, as I said, the pressure of a negative situation, the pressure of competition, or ultimately the pressure that comes from a Purim Dika celebration that followed a negative experience, but now you're experiencing it in a positive way. So that's really the meaning of it, in the sense that people in their lives, we have our structures, we have our conventional behavior, we have our institutions, we have our order in our lives. You wake up in the morning, you have your regimen, all in a healthy way, a balanced life. But then we all are in need of moments of transcendence where we break out from the regular norm, the regular pattern, the routine. And Purim is a day, there are many special days in the year where we do that. Every Shabbat is a transcendental day. The holidays are transcendental days. But Purim has a particularly unique element of transcendence in the area of joy, of completely breaking out from the normal logical parameters and logical conventions that we're so accustomed to. Because we're trying to reach a place that is beyond ourselves. So Purim has the secret of how to do that, and that's what we shall now address. So really it comes down to an exploration of understanding what we are made of. Someone to ask you, what are you comprised of? What are your ingredients? So most people would say a human being is a person with a mind, with a heart, which means cognitive tools, emotional tools, and then how we implement that into our lives. That's a human being. But we all know that we have what the modern psychologists call unconscious. I would call it more from earlier mystics and the psychology of Judaism, supraconscious. See, unconscious almost suggests, almost like I don't know if it's negative, but it's un or sub. Super would mean above consciousness. So when we look at a human being, the question is, who is the real you? Is it the conscious you, the one you're aware of, or is it the superconscious you that's beyond what you're aware of? Now, if you really think about it, obviously it's the superconscious, because consciousness, by definition, is limited. I'm conscious of something. There are many other things going on that I might not be conscious of. I know of my revealed strengths and my revealed skills. What about all the potential that lies within us? So really, a healthy human being is somebody that isn't just focusing on what they have, but also what they're capable of. What are you capable of? And this touches upon this element of structure. So in normal conditions, as I said, we have our subjectivity, our self-interest that keeps things balanced, and we live our lives. But in truth, as the mystics and Kabbalists explain to us, we are souls. And a soul is an unfathomable mystery that goes far, far beyond consciousness. And when you think about it, the deepest things in our lives, the most intimate things in our lives, are not something that are tangible, that we can measure with our sight, sound, taste, touch, or smell. They're also not tangible in the sense that they can be equated in an intellectual or mathematical formula. They're also not tangible in the sense that you can have a direct emotional, direct experience. They are in a place that are ethereal. So when you think about the real things in life, what is love? What is intimacy? What is truth? What is soulful? What touches us in the deepest place? That is far less apparent and far less accessible than the rest. So people, for example, in any given situation, and let's talk, psychology 101, you go to therapy for a problem difficult for you to find or maintain a relationship, personal, emotional, romantic relationship. Or we have difficulty making decisions, fears that drive us, different insecurities. I mean, we have our list of items. So, of course, these are all conscious experiences that we say, I can't move in my life. I'm stuck. I'm afraid. I can't open up. I'm critical. I'm not expressing myself. All the different things. Those are the conscious. What's going on the other side of the curtain is the real challenge. And that's where the real healing has to take place. Why are you this way? This is the tip of the iceberg. So getting into our so-called superconscious is not some type of optional exercise. It really is getting into what makes us tick. So just as we know today in science and physics that what you see with your eye, what you see is not what you get. We see objects, we see phenomenon, we see actions, we see interactions, we see different activity. We all know these are results of underlying forces that are not visible. Take just the concept of everything is made up of elements. Elements in turn are made of molecules. Molecules in turn are made of atoms. Atoms are comprised of subatomic particles. And you keep going, how far down the rabbit hole we can go, who knows? Now, the deeper you go, the less tangible, the less you can see. We've never seen an atom, let alone a subatomic particle. In the human being, we have limbs and organs. We have a body. But behind that, we have internal organs. Behind that, we have the circulatory system and the nervous system and the other systems, which are still relatively measurable. But then you start getting into the cellular structure, the cells within us, the genetic makeup, the chromosomes, and ultimately the DNA itself. These are invisible forces, but today we know these are the essential building blocks. These are the superconscious elements that drive the conscious elements. So how many of us think about this? You go around, even if you're on a cell phone or you're accessing other types of technology, whether it's transportation, whether it's in communications, whether it's electricity and so on. We take for granted. These are items, these are appliances, these are tools, resources we have to make our lives easier, better, faster, so on. However, that we all know that there are forces behind it that are shaping these items. Okay, so most of us don't necessarily care about it as long as it's working. But in our personal lives, it's very critical because what you're doing is a direct effect of what's going on behind the scenes. So throughout the year, most of the time, unless, as I mentioned before, we have some trauma, crisis, or difficulty, we get by on the conscious level, going to work, doing my thing. Comes a day of Purim and says, no, let's now go beyond ourselves. Let's get to a place that's beyond yourself, your conscious self. Actually get to the real you. And how do you do that? So the first thing is you have to strip away those conscious forces that trap us or keep us hostage. What are they? Let's start with the senses. Taste, touch, sound, let's start with vision. The sight, sound, taste, touch, and smell. What you see, what you hear. The conventional sights and sounds and the taste, touches, and smells of your life. Shut those down for a moment and you begin to enter a new realm. That's the realm beyond the tangible, beyond the concrete, conscious experience of life. Purim takes us through that journey. Now, in Judaism, there's no concept of a person losing control in the sense of getting intoxicated and drinking just to drink. We find very strict regulations. But there is an element in a pure environment, when you are attuned to it, to be able to somewhat strip your rational control that you have and get into a place that's more vulnerable and less deliberate, less controlling. That requires, obviously, trust, people that you trust, ability to trust yourself, to be able to be yourself. Because the masks we wear, the garments we dress in, the other things that we hide behind all year round, they are good for functioning, perhaps, but they're not good for really getting in touch with the inner self. And especially, as I mentioned, to get yourself out of the way, that you shouldn't be your own worst enemy. It's critical to be able to travel in there. But we don't do it all the time. We do it once a year, Purim. We do it another time a year, Yom Kippurim. You ever think of Kippurim? Sounds like Purim. The Tikkun Zohar, the Zohar, the additions to the Zohar say precisely that. Because these 2 days, in very different ways, one through fasting and through abstinence, and the other through indulging and through immersion. I wouldn't say indulging, immersion and engaging, reach the place called Yechida, that fifth dimension of the soul that I've talked about many times. Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chai, Yechida. 5 names the soul has, 5 dimensions. Nefesh is the biological life, that through the very conscious, observable life. Emotional life is Ruach, spirit. Intellectual life is Neshama, the 3rd dimension. And then come the transcendental elements. Chaya means transcendence. And then comes Yechida, transcendence of transcendence. You could have transcendence, Shabbat is a transcendent day, but it's still not the point, Adal Yada, where you're literally beyond structure altogether. It has its structure. And on that Yechida level, we reach twice a year, Yom Kippur and Purim. Yom Kippurim and Purim. But Purim, in a way, is even deeper because we reach it through our immersion and engagement with the world, through meals. It's a day where you can work, you can shop, even though many people celebrate it a holiday. But technically, it's not a Shabbat or a holiday where you're not allowed to travel and so on. And within that material world, within the structure, we're able to experience beyond structure. So explaining the importance of it, as I've said, is the importance is to be able to go there and, of course, come back and tell about it, that it should inform and inspire and permeate the daily routines, that they no longer are just daily routines, they've been now uplifted and saturated with an experience that's beyond structure. So it's very healthy for each of us to be able to reach a place like that, where we get beyond our own conventional structures. And Purim is the day that unleashes that power. A sacred day and a powerful day. Now yes, in those days of Persia of old, it began with negative experiences, with darkness, with deep darkness, to the point that Mordechai was concerned, very concerned, and Esther. And they had to do everything they could possibly do to counter those challenges. But indeed, the name Esther itself means Haster, Aster, Pane. It means like a concealment because things were concealed. And that's why you don't find God's name in the Megillah. Because everything that took place was behind the scenes. So God's hand is not revealed like in Passover. It's all within the choreography of what seems like natural events. 9 years, the miracle, the events that happened during Purim that we read in the Megillah transpired over a period of 9 years. At the time, you would think random little events. Ahasuerus happened to be king. He happened to throw a party, invited his wife, Vashti. She decided not to come. He got angry, decided to have her killed, then decided he needs a new queen. Esther happened to be ending the queen. Mordechai overhears Bixum Viserys' plotting conspiracy against the king. A little while later, after Haman's decree, the king has suddenly insomnia one night, sleepless in Shushan. And that is a whole turn of events. He wants to reward Mordechai. Everything seems, if you were there, if it all happened one day, it's one thing. It happened over years. You would think, a bunch of random events. But in retrospect, when you read the Megillah, you see everybody's the right character in the right place at the right time, all leading to what? To a miraculous salvation from the hands of a Middle Eastern terrorist. So besides the fact that it teaches us divine providence in the most mysterious and bizarre ways, and we ask ourselves, what about the divine providence of my life? How many things do you misunderstand today because you're living in the moment, in the myopic self-interest moment? So Purim digs into the concealed hand, the invisible hand, the choreographer, the divine choreographer that's writing the real script. So that immediately takes you out of the structure, because the structure tells you, the stock market went up and down today, the weather is so-and-so, other events that I have to do on a daily basis. I have to send my children to school, or I have to go to work, I have to come back from work. These are happening on the surface level. What's going on behind the scenes? That's the story of Purim. Now, their behind the scenes ended up being challenging, as I said, and then that became an open, the revealed decree, and Mordechai and Esther had to dig deeper, and they did, and they discovered what they discovered, and then the day was transformed into a tremendous holiday where we now also dig deeper to find our superconscious that transcends the events of our lives. So on a very basic level, the joy of Purim means discover the deeper story. So even though your life may have its challenges, you may have experienced, God forbid, a loss, family, different trajectories that are completely mysterious and we don't understand why this should happen, why good people suffer, the injustices, events going on in Israel, in the Middle East, in Europe, in other places of the Middle East or the world. We may not understand the actual events, but there's a bigger story. Look for the story. The Megillah, as we read it, tells us another story. Connect the dots and you get a different story. That's one basic point. So even the most negative experience has a bigger, deeper story. It's the tip of the iceberg. What else is happening? And then comes the most important point, which is that once you realize that you've seen a new horizon, one that's beyond the story, the narrative that you're so accustomed to, then you suddenly discover a part of yourself you were not aware of. So when you say to yourself, who am I, what have I gone through, you say, okay, here's my life experiences, I'm ready to write a biography, and you can add up a bunch of things. But that's the conscious life you've lived. What's going on with your inner script? The inner script takes you to a place that's super conscious, and that's when you begin to go beyond yourself. So it's the most fascinating experience. Most people, as you hear, go beyond. Why should I go beyond myself? I want myself. I like myself. Let's assume you like yourself. Because there's so much more to yourself that you're losing out on and you're writing off because you're not even aware it exists. So Purim takes us to that place. And thank God today we don't need the painful reminder as it was then. We can just go there in a direct way by recognizing here's a day that took us there and continues to take us in every generation, and every time, and every year. So what would you discover? Ask yourself, what will I discover when I go to that place? So initially it may be a little frightening because I'm comfortable, even with let's say with the negative stuff, people say, I'd rather have the known evil than the unknown. But what happens if it's not evil? What would you discover if you're able to put away the blinders, to cleanse the doors of perception, as Blake writes? And what would you be left with? If all is infinite, the light. What would you look like? What does the infinite you look like when you cleanse the doors of perception? When you cleanse them in a way, in a pure way, in an innocent way, in an honest way? Many ways you could say it would bring us back to our childhood. If you look at a young child, as I often mention, a child is pre-conventions, does not have yet preconceived notions, prejudices, biases, because a child is a clean slate. As adults, imagine you can go back to that type of clean slate, to that place inside of us that transcends the activities of our lives, where you are not just a product, or definitely not a victim, but not a product of your circumstances, but you are pre-circumstances or post-circumstances. It's like looking at yourself from outside of yourself. Going up on a mountain, look at yourself. This is the you going through the motions. It would be interesting whether you could paint such a picture. Look at what you're involved in, your activities. Put it down on paper. Then study it. Make believe it's somebody else. What would it look like to you? Would you be pleased with what you see? Even if yes, as I said earlier, and in most cases many of us have plenty of things we'd not be pleased with, but let's say you're pleased, but it's not all of you. That's the you that's functioning. That's the functional you, the conscious you. In the language of Kabbalistic language, that's your 10 conscious spheres. Your 3 intellectual, cognitive ones, Chachma, Bina, Das, which corresponds to Neshama, your soul. Your 3 primarily emotional, Chesed, Gvura, Tiferes, which is your emotional, conscious self. Then comes your behavioral, Netzach, Chayd, Yesod, and Malchus. So you have 3 components. These are your conscious. If you were able to see more, you'd see a soul beneath the surface, beyond those faculties and attributes. You'd see chaya. Chaya is the lower dimension of keser. So keser, the crown, a crown is hovers above the 10 immanent and personal faculties, localized. Keser. And keser is made up of two parts, as the Eitz Chaim says, from the Arizal, written by Reb Chaim Vital. One part called Arich, that's the lower part of keser, that relates to the 10. So think of it as what's called a makif hakarev, a hovering transcendent energy, but a transcendent that relates. It's like transcendence relative to the immanence of the structured faculties. It's still transcendence above. And then there's atik, completely removed. You can't even count it as part of the spheres. So you see atik as a removed state. It hovers, but it's a total transcendence of transcendence. So that's where Purim resides, as does Yom Kippur, in that atik level. When the soul is the place that is not part of the structure, but yet it informs the structure because everything originates from there. So Hasidic and Kabbalistic and Hasidic talk at length was the interface between the beyond and the structure. And Keser itself is the interface, Atik and Arich, and then in each of the spheres, Chachma, Bina, and so on. As a matter of fact, Hemshech Hayim Beis that I recite often, which is a series of discourses, 3 volumes, hundreds and hundreds of pages of the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe. I teach it every morning, and many of these classes are online on YouTube. So there, the essential theme is the interface between the divine and existence, including between Keser and so on. But Purim was one of those interfaces, because Purim is not structure. It's a day in the year, but it's a day that's beyond structure. Ad lo yada. Not, God forbid, that we can't distinguish between good and evil, because there is a structure for that. But we realize that even the good in our lives, and even the evil in our lives, I should say the other way around, even the evil in our lives, no, let me correct myself. The evil in our lives, the bad things that happen, even the good in our lives, which is also structured good, is a place that's beyond it. And when you can touch that, you can transcend anything. That doesn't mean there isn't time to cry and there isn't a time to mourn and grieve. There is a time. But there's a time to rise. And your bigger picture is, what do you look like beyond the circumstances of your life? That would be the Purim snapshot, the Purim X-ray, the Purim CAT scan of your being. So that's what's asked of us, and that's what's expected of us. You could reach that place. Now, as I said, it doesn't come easy, so it comes sometimes with the l'chaim, sitting with others. Above all, opening yourself up. Opening yourself up to the possibilities of a greater you, of a beyond you. And recognizing that's not going to disturb or upset your entire life. On the contrary, it will inform it. You can come back and say, okay, now how do I lift up my daily routines, my chachma, my bina, my das, my intelligence, my cognitive and my emotions, to a place of transcendence, where you come to a point where you're experiencing two things together. A localized, specific experience, but you sense transcendence in it. You sense how you're not bound by it, that you are not made of it. You're there and experiencing it, but you are in some ways beyond it. This is the Purim experience. Towards joy is a direct outgrowth and a direct cause to reach there. Because first of all, joy, simcha, prejudices. Let's start with, because the question is, what comes first, the joy or that sense of boundlessness? Let's start with simcha. When you celebrate, and you find something to celebrate with friends, with family, simcha, prejudices. Joy breaks boundaries. It pierces boundaries, transcends boundaries. Or the other way around, if you're able to access that boundless, that structureless part of your superconscious, then joy comes naturally. The joy of the child. You just belong. You feel that you're of something of a higher place. You feel like a king or a queen. You feel that you are the dignity of something that's beyond the circumstances of your life. You know what kind of feeling that is? So even if you grew up in a home with parents that are miserable parents. I'm just using the worst experience. The worst example. People who absentee, hurtful, insecure, projected all that garbage onto you. That's not you. That's a circumstance. That may be what you've gone through. So you have suffered, but you're not become a sufferer. Purim teaches us that the you is not defined by a product and a sum total of your experiences. It's fundamentally apart and beyond. So imagine connecting to that and looking at yourself then, we would be fearless. We wouldn't be bound and trapped by all these other forces. It's easier said than done, but nevertheless it's doable. It's doable if we allow ourselves to free ourselves from our own self. That's the challenge. Because of course here's the catch-22. If I'm bound by my self-interest and by my own blind and distorted self, how can that lead me to a place outside of myself? Very good question. So there's a few ways. First of all, self-interest should tell you that you want to reach places that are beyond self-interest. Self-interest should tell you, I want to reach a place that's beyond my needs, my immediate needs. Secondly, is through connecting ourselves to the eternal, which is why in Purim we connect ourselves. We connect ourselves to others through the gifts and the charity we give. We connect our others through communing, celebrating together, partying together. What does togetherness do? Togetherness gets you out of your own little hole, out of your own box. Because now you're with someone else. You have to communicate with them. You have to dance or sing with them. If they compel you to go out of your regular conventional sense of self. If you bring yourself, the same self before Purim into Purim, that's what you're unfortunately going to have. But it doesn't have to be that way. So Purim has many methods of how a person gets to a place where they do not define themselves only by themselves. Because one of the worst problems is called breathing. When you breathe your own recycled air, your own thoughts, your own feelings again and again and again over the years, it gets hardened and becomes very difficult for you to be flexible. By coming together with others, you recognize, I need you, you need me. Like today, on Tzayim Sester, the custom is you give a machzis hashekel to commemorate the half coin that was given in the times of the temple. You are half and I am half. I need you, you need me. We're not complete without one another. And even with God we make, so to speak, that type of statement. So what we have is the ability to get beyond yourself. You ever see someone dance to the point of completely free abandon? You know, under the sky, under a dark sky, under a starry sky, near an ocean. Did you have a situation like that? Some people feel that experience in the shower when they start singing to themselves and hope nobody's listening. Others experience it at other times. It's very healthy to have an outlet like that. You don't always have to be in control. An outlet which means you go somewhere or a particular situation where you can just really yell to the heavens. Just get it all out. And you'll be surprised what kind of refreshing element there is in that. Because what happens is it allows you to exercise and access voices and forces inside of you that are in your superconscious. Just to say why, even to not to become bitter and not to get into a paralyzed place where why did this happen to me, but rather the pain of why did I deserve this? I'm a greater person than this. And in other words, these negative experiences are meant to cry out in order for you to see, I am not this. This is not me. So then who is you? As you keep doing this, you more and more used to a you that is not defined, not by your parents, not by your schools, not by your community and society, but from within. Now this doesn't happen overnight, but when you get there, you suddenly say, I am controlling my day. I am controlling my week. I'm controlling my month. I'm controlling my life. Because it's all driven from within. That's ultimately the ultimate goal. So this is what Purim is about for each one of us. The capacity to go deeper into that part of our beings, to be able to transcend ourselves. Now, if you have difficulty doing so because you just can't get beyond yourself, that's why we go to a Farbrengen. That's why we say L'chaim. That's why we have friends, and that prod us, and we prod them. If you're a person who's stuck in your comfort zones, only you can get yourself out of there. Nobody can do it for you. So our challenge is, how do we have that catalyst? That's why it's important to have good friends. and also role models that do this. Push yourself beyond what your today's capacity. And this can be in the areas of personal growth, our own intellectual growth through reading and gathering information. But it also can be through our commitments, additional charity until it hurts, additional study, additional things that go beyond, as he says in Tanya chapter 15, beyond your habits. Break a routine. Break it for the good. Do something. You do it 3 times, do it a 4th time. You do it 10 times, do it 11th time. You always give charity a certain amount, give a little more another time. These things tend to shake up status quo, and you'll be surprised. I've seen this with my own eyes. People change things on the easier level, it spills over and creates change in other areas. You have to be not afraid to say, this is what I've learned, and this is where I'm moving toward. So there's many ways to interpret this and apply this in our lives. That's why we're here for Purim. Purim is a day where each of us can access that dimension, Ad Lo Yada, a place that is beyond perception, beyond the walls of perception. That's the Purim experience. So let me conclude with this. Again, a prayer and a blessing. We live in challenging times, but we live in blessed times. Thank God we control our destinies today. Israel does as well, even more than others. But are we using that control, or are we just playing defense and wringing our hands and crying out without really using the strengths we have? We have tremendous strengths. We have a tremendous unity. Why do we have to be divisive? That unity is the key to vanquishing all enemies. So we have these challenges, but we also have unbelievable strengths. We have to be able to rise to the occasion, get those people who have those strengths to talk about them, motivating others, and creating a grassroots revolution. That's nothing less is needed. A grassroots revolution in reaching places that are beyond our conscious self. And you know something? If you do this individually, it spills over to the community, and the community to other communities, until the entire world. Nobody can stop this forward march of progression, because we're going to a place of going to be total fusion of matter and spirit, even though we may not be there. But that total fusion is what leads us when we're studying, or we study the Hasidic teachings about Purim, and other things I spoke about today. That leads us to that place, allowing us to transcend and get to a point that is beyond, and then bringing it back to tell about it, transforming the present with it. That when you wake up tomorrow morning, you realize all the details of my life are part of a big picture. And how does my mission fit into this picture? So with that, I want to wish everyone again a very freilich and happy Purim. Real joy. Joy from within, joy from without, inside out, upside down, topsy-turvy. And from Purim, may the joy extend to Shushan Purim, which is Purim in Jerusalem, and then to enjoy the rest of the month. And this joy leads into the joy of the next month, and we should finally be in the month of Nisan, the month of Passover. We should finally fulfill the promise. Rabbi Yeshua, he says that B'Nisan Nigalu, Jews were redeemed in Egypt, and B'Nisan they will be redeemed. And when these two redemptions, Purim and Pesach, these two come together, it just intensifies it even more. And what is redemption at the end of the day? Again, transcendence. You know, you can be stuck in a place, you can get comfortable with it. Geula frees you from the confines. So we have the superconscious within us, a profound superconscious, the effort that we place, the Kabbalah sale of just accepting that this is what you should be doing. These are the forces that dig into that superconscious place and reveals it in our lives, in our loves, in our relationships, and the people we deal with. So God bless everybody to be able to access that and implement it. And until next week, this has been Rabbi Jacobson on a Purim night, Purim Eve, the year 2016, Tavshinayim Vav. Everyone be blessed, and I look forward to hear from you. Please write to us at meaningfullife.com, where you can get all your questions answered, and another way that we can help you in your journey. Thank you so much.